be recorded. So to connect us this morning, we have some images I'd like you to consider. Image A shows a MasterChef type competition. You can see in image B, a man is microwaving some leftovers or perhaps a frozen dinner. Image C, the dog is dining on a mystery meal. It might be someone's leftovers. And in image D, we have not so Norman Rockwellian image of a family maybe sharing some leftovers. So if you would, in the chat or unmute your microphone and share with us which of those images speaks to you in your approach to leftovers and why. And this is also another chance to sign in. There's a separate sign in for this deep dive session, unique from the SLAM session we were just in. And also, we'll be using these slides. So definitely use that bit.ly or the link in the chat to open up the slides. Daisy is looking to get rid of leftovers, possibly make room in the refrigerator and feeding them to her dog. I've been doing that with our meal that we had for the holidays. Would anyone else like to share their approach to leftovers? Okay, so we're here to talk about Jamboard. And I wonder how many of you, before we get started, if your cameras are on, have used Jamboard in the past, by show of hands. Okay, hopefully we'll be able to learn from each other here. I've been practicing a little bit with Jamboard, and we'll be practicing here as well as in our deep dive. And so we'll be looking at ways that students can collaborate in pairs and groups of 4. And we'll also be looking at some of the tools and features in Jamboard. It's a little bit different from some of the other Google features in student access. And then we'll have a couple times to break out and share ideas with others on group management tools, group roles, and ways to ensure equity of voice for our students. So our working agreements, if possible, please keep your camera on and participate in the chat or unmute at any time. You can see our norms of collaboration here. I'm going to give you about 23 seconds to consider Jamboard and what you would like to get out of this session and choose one of those norms to focus on. All right, so I mentioned, but did not model for you in the SLAM, a couple different ways to access Jamboard. And so I'm going to model that for you now in our Google Meet. Can everyone see my screen? In the lower right-hand corner, there are those 3 dots where I went to record, and just above recording is whiteboard, open a jam. And I wanted to show this to you because it doesn't say Jamboard, but it is a way to open up a new Jamboard to collaborate if you're in the middle of a meeting with adults or students, or you might have already set one up and you're going into your drive to find one, to find a template that is already set up. So if I click on that, it's creating a jam. It takes some time, and all of the people in a meeting, all of your students in a class will need to have edit access if you want them to type in on this jam. Right. So I'm giving you edit access, and anyone in the district who'd like to see this later can see it too. So this Jamboard looks exactly like a Jamboard that you might open up the other way. So I'll minimize this for a moment, opening up a new tab and going to my waffle of all the Google apps. I don't see Jamboard yet. When I get to the second tier of apps, Jamboard has this logo, and you can see its name. So it does appear different from the way you would click to open it within Google Meets. This is how it looks when you're opening it up from your Google apps or your waffle. So I'm going to go ahead and use this one and ignore the other one. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see an orange circle. It says New Jam. I'm going to model for you a few different ways to use Jamboard for collaboration and making these frames. Instead of with like Google Slides, they're called frames here. So we'll call this our deep dive session. And you can see I'm on frame 1. So let's say I'm in a science class, and I'm going to set the background for dots. And let's say we're doing a unit in chemistry. We're looking at photosynthesis. So I'm going to show you a website here called Cool Text. I can look at all these different, they call them logos or styles. And I decided my students would be invigorated or interested by the skate font or style. So I'm going to make a title for my Jamboard. Photosynthesis. And you can see it's populating and appearing up there. And then I can just drag it from this website. This is a free website over to my tab that I have open. And it loads on this first frame. Let's say I want that to look a little different, can resize, move it around. And then let's say I'd like to give the equation. So over on the left-hand side of my screen, you can see that I can add images from my many different ways. I often am doing this on the fly as a science teacher. I'd like to quickly search. So I'm going to say photosynthesis equation and not grab one from a drive or from a desktop this time. I could search. There may or may not be exactly what I'm looking for. So of course I could change my query and double click. And that image, in this case, the photosynthesis equation, will appear on my slide. I'm checking the chat. So thank you, Daisy. That cool place where I just found that font is on the slides you have access to, the second to last slide. This is where I just dragged the colorful text in from cooltext.com. So that's a live link if you want to play with it right now or later on in our sandbox session. We'll have another hour after this deep dive to create our own. So I'm going to model for you a couple more things. If I wanted to use a text box to give the students a prompt, I just click on the text box and then I can type in this case, I want them to count atoms to see if this version of the photosynthesis equation is balanced. So I might type in how many atoms of each element are on product side. And because I don't want to type that again for this other side, I can duplicate it and just change one word reactant. Every time you click out of a text box, anytime maybe you've accidentally clicked out of a text box, it happens often in Jamboard, you can edit to copy and paste or to get back in. And this is kind of what Bill Thompson was alluding to. Students can edit each other's posts, and there's no way to know who did that. So building rapport is something we'll talk about. Maybe using this on non-content, socio-emotional learning type topics in the beginning is a good way to start out and teach students preferred behaviors. If you do have a text box, you can change the color, the size of the font a couple of different ways. One way to change the size of the words there is just to drag the corner. And then another way is if you're selecting it, you can click over here and it will go into many different sizes, right? So if I want to make these green to make it a little bit more interesting, to make it stand out for the students, I can. And then when you want to make another slide, you just click the arrow. There's no way to delete that. If students are collaborating, accidentally clicking these arrows, it's not a big deal. They just have an extra frame and there's no way to delete that frame. So if I were doing this actually in class, I'll back up a moment to this photosynthesis example, I would probably copy this frame, and for every group of 4, every group of 3, all of my frames in here would be the same one. And I'd say group 1, you're on frame 1, group 2, you're on frame 2. But for the sake of time and to see other examples, I'm going to go to the second frame just to model another way of doing this. So if we were using this in a math class, we might want to use graph paper. You're using this in chemistry or physics. So we have, you can see many different backgrounds to choose from. And the only way to clear frame doesn't actually clear the background is to go back and choose the clear one. So in this example, let's say I'd like to have the students solving a math problem in 2 different ways. I found the best way to divide a screen horizontally or vertically or in any direction is to use the bar. And that is as narrow as it gets, unfortunately. We can choose the color. We can change the color as well as the outline. And then in this situation, I think I want black text boxes. I'm going to have the students solve for X. And my equation, I'll give them 7X minus 3X equals 4 times 5X minus 30. And just like with the photosynthesis example, I don't want to type that out again. So I'm going to duplicate it, drag it over, and then I can resize these. I can even make them tilt for fun, for interest's sake, for the students. And on this one, I might have them, instead of solving, let's see, I made it tilt so I can't get back in very easily. So this is an example of I click too many times and I have to click edit again to get in there. So if I'm going to try again. All right, so I'm going to edit, and instead of solving, I'm going to find a different way. Okay, and so I'm going to model just one more example for you, and that is for any subject matter, if students were going to be doing some type of annotating. I think Jamboard lends itself to doing this. I might have just gone out to the internet to find some text, an article. This particular article I had saved in my Google Drive. I'm going to give the students a prompt. And again, I would do this a copy on each frame for every group. I think I'd like my prompt to be in a different color than the text box that I'll use for the article. So you can copy and paste just like with other Google apps. Sorry. And then for this one, it's defaulted to the color that I used before, and I want it to be another shape. So you can see there's a little bit of clicking around, and I can quickly change the color. I want this to be a key. So the highlight tool that students are going to use is up here with the pen. And the students maybe will use red when they're reading this paragraph in a group. And you can see I'm on pen right now instead of highlighter. So anytime you want to change something, just go back over to the right-hand side. If I feel that that's too dark, maybe I've gone over it a couple times and now they can't read the word very well. There's an eraser tool, or there's a back button. I could clear the entire frame, or I could just hit this back button here. So if I want to use the highlighter, and I've noticed on this screen, just doing one strike with the highlighter over each of the terms, it's nice and light, and the students can still see the original text below. So if below, as they're reading together, they're reading about energy sources, they'll highlight in yellow. If they're reading about the results of decomposition, in this example, they'll highlight in green. And I might assign group roles. Perhaps student A in this group will be using a red highlighter, student B will use yellow. A very good idea as you're sending students out into breakout rooms. Another thing I would say when doing this type of thing, we could use a sticky note as well if you wanted students to annotate something that they've highlighted. They could, let's say, put a sticky note next to where they've highlighted and annotate something else that they might do. They might be using a different sticky note color per student in the group, or they might be asked by their teacher to write their initials or their name on their sticky note. I'm looking over at the chat. I see a question from Jose. Can they make a copy themselves? So I'm going to show you, Jose, if I were to make you a editor in this particular jam, then you would have access. But I can also go into the setting and I can make sure that you can't copy as a student if I didn't want you to, or maybe I'm working with adults instead. So this is under the sharing. I can make Jose or anyone a participant. He can make copies until I go back in and say, oh wait, I don't want him to make copies actually, or I do want him to make copies. Am I missing any other questions? I'm seeing a question from Jose. Are students able to see it from their screen? I'm not sure what you mean. So this is like any Google app. I guess we'll see down below. But for example, on slide 13, I've given you a link and I made this a hyperdoc. So just like any Google Doc, Google Slides, Google anything, a form I'm sharing with you, I can put a link into an email, into Google Classroom. So absolutely, students could have view access or edit access, and they would be able to open up your Jamboard. I hope that answered the question. I need to model a couple more things for you before I open it up and ask for questions. So back on this math example, let's say you're talking to students before you send them off into breakouts, and you're explaining to students something or other. There is a laser feature. They might use this as they're talking to each other. You might use the laser as you're giving instructions. You can see that fades away, or it could be a single dot. So that's kind of a fun tool to know about. We looked a little bit at some shapes and images, sticky notes. And one thing that I like to use when I'm in between tools over here is this arrow. Kind of resets your screen. I would say one more thing before I open it up for questions and exploring for you is that before you're using this with students, you might want to model it every time. So for example, on this one, I'm explaining, on the reactant side, how many atoms of carbon, and I'm saying student A will be using carbon. I would also model for the students how to use the sticky notes. So maybe carbon equals, and perhaps there were 3 atoms I didn't see. So modeling for the student over here, a student might be putting these in, and then modeling that they can change the color. Hydrogen, how many atoms of hydrogen are there on this side of the equation, and just tapping out closes that sticky note. If you wanted the students to say who they are as they're collaborating on different problems, you might have them write their name or their initials. So I might write Robin Mendenhall as my initials, and then I say for oxygen, there were however many atoms, 5 atoms. So definitely modeling for students how to use this and using it on non-content topics like flavors of ice cream. All right, so I'm gonna look and see if there are questions, and then, so can students apply text to speech and speech to text? I don't think so. This feels a little bit like a beta version. So I think that is not. I'll get back to you if I learn anything different, but I think no, Ms. Sarza. Is it Stefan or Steven? Please unmute if you have a question.
Hi. So right now we're looking at the deep dive Jamboard, and then we put photosynthesis and all of that. So if you're gonna share it with students, or if you're gonna share it with us, will students be able to remove some of the things that you place in there initially, or is there a way that students won't be able to erase anything or remove anything, and they can just add to it?
Yes, and I wouldn't know, Stephen, I wouldn't know who did that. So let's say I have a student who puts in carbon equals 3, and then a third student, someone else, comes in and deletes it. Maybe by accident. Let's assume positive and positive, presume positive intentions. Maybe they did it on purpose. You don't know who did that. And so before sending students off into a breakout room, let's say in Google Meets, I might be doing this with the whole class. So let's go over here to this example. Let's say instead of decomposition, the example is my favorite place to go, my favorite beaches, right? And so before you send the students off to do the content version decomposition, as a whole class, you're modeling how they might do the activity, right? And talking them through some of their group roles. So if you, I don't know, maybe you already have some group roles set, like the captain, and these might rotate. Maybe one person, the facilitator, is called the captain, and your students have these roles for a certain set time. If you're going to set group roles at that particular time of the activity, and it's not a routine that you have, I think that the group roles can help with the fact that there's no version history and you don't know who deleted something that was written, so that there's a person keeping track of time, there's a person who is facilitating, someone will share out, so that the students are so busy and they each have a different role, they're kind of keeping themselves or each other in check. You built up a strong rapport with them, and classroom management, things like that, classroom environment. Another thing is, let's say students are on this frame for group 3, students are on this frame for group 4, and you as the teacher aren't necessarily going into each of their meeting rooms, but you're in the jam and you're clicking in and watching them. So you can see when things are happening. You may not see someone delete something, but you can go in there and make little comments like, I see you're doing this well. You might think about doing something, next. And you might modify so that they know you're looking, I guess. They know you're checking. They know that you're there.
Thank you, thank you. I've used this some other activities, but I really like how you use the sticky note. That was very powerful, I believe, like adding some notes. Because the reason why I'm asking, going back to my question, is the reason why I'm asking is, yeah, assuming positive intentions. So I placed an image, and then when I checked on their work, I was like, "Where's the image right here?" And so I don't know if it accidentally they erased it, or maybe I wasn't that clear with my instruction, and so they removed it, and then they just focused on the other image. And so I want to know if that's my main question. If I'll be able to create initially the Jamboard document and then share it with them, I don't want them to delete something. I want them to add something. Maybe that's my point. But if they have full access with it, if I'm gonna have them as editor, then I just have to put some modeling and maybe some additional instructions for them to do. But thank you. That the I was just that the sticky note was just something for me that I haven't thought of that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So I think to go a little bit further with that, let's go through making a copy. If I had just made this, let's say I'm a science teacher, I'm introducing, I don't know, food webs, and we're going to talk about energy transfer. So students are going to see a phenomena here, pollinator, and I don't want the student to delete my copy of my butterfly, or what if they do? So I'm saving it, right? I can call this template, well, it's copy of dplib, but maybe I'm going to change this. So template.
That's right. Make the
Right?
copy, save the
And then
original.
we'll call it photosynthesis, or I don't know, trophic levels. And so as I teach trophic levels, I've got this copy, and then I can make a copy of it for period 1, period 2, period 3. So I really have like 7 copies of this if I teach a 6-period option. And each one of them I can rename. So here's my period 2. And there's my, next copy could be period 3. And that's how I would manage it. And then with all of the other, just like with any other Google thing, you have your Google Drive and you can organize these things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yay.
Yep. So I think, Daisy, I was really trying to answer your question there. Daisy Zavala is asking, Do you have to make multiple copies and share each copy to each group? Okay, so similar but different question. Let's say that this is, just my introduction in my 5E lesson sequence of a phenomena. I'm having trouble right now copying my frame, but let's see, clear frame. So, you know, I guess I would just do it again, just copying it. So like I was showing you with duplicates, yeah, I would make every one of these frames the same as each other, Daisy, so that group 3 has this frame, group 4 is going to this frame. And when I used this with teachers in a session, I found out that it was very confusing unless I put a text box up at the top. And I said, not only is this frame 3, but this is for group 3. And maybe that's another color. Am I making this clear? Okay, good. Are there other questions before we move on to something else? Right, we're going to move on to something else then. I would like to see, I'll share with you a couple of images, and then we'll start to talk in a breakout room, I think. So this is an example of students using a stylus or using their mouse to solve a math problem, and where the students might each be using a color. So in this group, there's 3 students, and they're using 3 distinct colors. In this example, you might have students in a breakout. This is introducing a phenomena, but I think it could work in any subject, not just in science, where students are asking questions, and they might be in a group where you know, everyone's brainstorming questions. So perhaps each of the 4 students in a group has come up with 2 to 3 questions on their own. Then the group starts to move these around so they can click and drag the sticky notes, trying to put them into different clusters, maybe similar questions. And then they might, as a group, discuss and come to consensus on the best question. And then they can share that out. Another way you might use Jamboard is, whether this is bell work, a warm-up, or in the middle of a class during an activity, students could create them themselves, or you could make a template. And this could be with images, with sticky notes, where they're all in order right now, but originally perhaps all of the blue were on the right-hand side of the screen and all of the yellow were piled up on the other side, and the students drag these together while they're discussing things. I think it would be a really good idea to provide them a place where they have sentence frames for talking, so that they could use Jamboard not just to rely on each other in productive group work situations, but also to practice language. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you're doing a jigsaw activity with an article or any type of Freyer model vocabulary, again, you can see the bars separating a screen into 4 quadrants. And there's so many more examples. So we're going to get into a breakout so you can talk to each other a little bit. And before we go into the breakout, I want to point out that I do have a couple of group roles for you. I'm going to randomly assign you. And one discussion point you might have during the time you have for your breakout is who was born furthest away from, I don't know, your school site, let's say, or the district office. You can determine. That person will facilitate your discussion in the breakout. And the person born closest to the site or the district office will be the reporter when we come back into a whole group after this breakout. So I'll give you about 5 minutes, and you can choose one of these 2 prompts or discuss them both. The first one is best ways to use Jamboard from the examples that you'll be clicking through. So this is actually a live link, and you'll be clicking on all of these examples. I'll open it now. So you can click through. There's 20 different examples here. And you might be thinking and discussing which lend themselves, which of these activities or uses of Jamboard lend themselves best to critical thinking, or which lend themselves best to literacy and academic language practice, whether that's writing or speaking. So please use the link at the top of that slide. This is slide 12. Does everyone have access to the slides? Just in case, I put it in one more time. And I'm going to put you into groups. And I guess I'll stop sharing my screen for this. All right, everyone. So as people are coming back, I'm hoping to hear from each group from the reporter, maybe some of the highlights that were discussed in your breakout group. So remember, the reporter was the person born closest to the site. And for our group 1, we had Alyssa, Giselle, and William. Did you talk about who was born closest, William? Did you talk about critical thinking in group 1 or academic language practice and which JAM uses might lend themselves to those?
I'm going to step in for a second, Robin. I was the facilitator, being the farthest born from site, and we did speak about both the critical thinking and the literary development. And I know William and my other team member were tied for closest.
Okay.
To site,
well, thank you, Alyssa.
Keep going.
Please do. Do you want to give us some highlights?
Sure. So we were talking about, for critical thinking, the idea that we can build upon other students' ideas. That really would help, just the concept of going past just identifying information, trying to synthesize ideas. And then for the literary component, we like the idea of the Post-it notes because it's a low risk, it's not a high stakes activity where the kids are already looking at a Post-it note is fundamentally informal. So there's not that pressure. I actually peeked while we were finishing up that Seesaw account because I do see the need for a speech to text or text to speech, and I can't get past the piece that there's not a history of who is adding or editing, and not just for the student who might mistakenly delete something or might use the time less appropriately, that I will be able to see who needs help. So I can't look back to see who might need a concept further developed. I don't have a record of who's placing what where. So I'm probably more inclined on using that Google Doc, a shared Google Doc. But anyhow, yeah. Been super interesting.
Thank you, Alyssa. So one of the things that Alyssa was saying that I really like is where you have students building on each other's ideas to build critical thinking. So I was just trying to model that a little bit. Can you all see my screen? Not presenting, am I? I'm going to present. Okay, yeah, so Alyssa brought up a lot, but one of the things that she said at first was having students build on each other's ideas. And so I just brought up the, kind of a socio-emotional getting to know each other, maybe a fun way to start class one day, where students could say if they like dogs or cats, and maybe a student says, ooh, you have an orange cat, I have a black cat, or more academic examples as well. They could edit, they could give each other ideas. I think to get past the idea that there's no version history and you can't see what students are doing, you might just practice this a lot in small groups when you're meeting with the teacher. Maybe you have one-on-one interviews and the teacher and student are doing this, just the two of them, using a jam for tutoring purposes or going over grades and next steps of growth. And so building a culture where students are likely to be honest and have integrity, I guess, is what I'm saying. But let's hear from another group. We have time to hear from just one other. Does group 2, 3, or 4 want to share some highlights that they were talking about?
Sure, I can go. I was in group 2, and we talked a little bit about just how the Jamboard made everything so accessible for resources, not just for us, but obviously for the students. And the idea that this was good practice for them to do breakout rooms and practice together, right? Lowering that affective filter and having them practice their academic language, right? Because as they do group work together, they're more likely to practice that and get other answers. So we really talked about that a little bit and how this might be something really good for a warm up or a social emotional learning, right? Getting them being able to get to know each other a little bit better, like you guys have mentioned previously. And even we might be able to do like a KWL as a Jamboard, right, as we start new units.
Yes, thank you. So I want to bring you to the last two slides. Since we have about a minute left, this session ends at 11 o'clock, and we'll come back for a sandbox activity, or a time period, I guess, where you're paid to work on your own Jamboard templates. So I wanted to show you one more time where this cool text link is, and just a couple of things that I have found to make sure if I haven't said anything, if I've missed any of these things. I think I should have said in our SLAM session how very important building relationships is. We all know this, but that in teaching any type of new tech tool, that's a great opportunity to get to know students and work on their socio-emotionals as we're meeting new groups in periods 2, 4, and 6. I think that's so important. So on this last slide, you have a session evaluation for this deep dive, a link to that. And in 15 minutes time, we're going to come back to the same Google Meet. So I put in the same Google Meet you're in right now, another link to it just in case. There it is. There's a third sign in for your morning for the sandbox period of time. And once you're done creating something for your first few units with students here in Learning Cycle 3, we'd like you to post that to this Padlet. So you'll see this is for everybody today. And number 5, Jamboard for collaboration, is over here on the right-hand side. Are there questions before we go on a 15-minute break?